I never meant to see it, but once you've watched your husband press his mouth against your daughter-in-law's throat, once you've heard her laugh low in the dark, you can't unsee it, or unhear it. It wasn't the kiss that ruined me. It was the sound of her voice whispering, "No one will ever believe her." I froze in the hallway, my phone slipping against the banister, the faint red light of the security camera above blinking. It was catching everything, his hands on her waist, her lips parted, the quick, hungry way they devoured each other. My husband, Thomas, my son's wife, Claire, my family rotting from the inside, while the walls of my house bore witness. The worst part, Claire saw the camera too. Her gaze flicked up, a slow smirk curving her mouth, as if she wanted me to know she had just created a weapon. And she was right. 2 years later, that video surfaced in probate court, not as evidence of an affair, but as proof of coercion, manipulation, abuse. Claire stood there in her black silk dress, trembling voice steady enough to cut glass. He used his power over me. I was trapped. I had no choice. Gasps echoed around the room, my children's faces Daniel's, my son's twisted with horror, as though they had been blindsided by a truth I had hidden, and maybe I had, because when I first saw it, that kiss, I thought silence would protect us. I thought burying the secret would shield my family. I was wrong. That silence became the noose around our throats. Every lawyer in that courtroom smelled blood, trusts, wills, assets frozen. A quarter-century of careful saving, planning, clawing our way into security, suddenly hanging by a single thread, knotted in Claire's hands. But let me take you back to the night it began. Because stories like this never start in the courtroom. They start in kitchens, in shadows, in the places women like me think are safe until we learn that even our own homes can turn against us. It was late. The house smelled of garlic and lemon from the roast chicken cooling on the counter. I had run to the store for wine. Thomas insisted Claire stay behind to help tidy up. When I walked in through the back door, the bags cutting into my wrists, I heard a noise that didn't belong, the scrape of a chair, a hushed laugh. I rounded the corner. The grocery bag dropped. Apples hit tile and rolled, thudding against the baseboard. And there they were, her hands on his collar, his mouth bruising hers. They sprang apart, but not fast enough. Her lipstick was smeared across the corner of his jaw. His shirt buttons strained where her fist had tugged too hard. "Margaret," Thomas said, "too calm, too smooth. It's not what it looks like." But God, it was exactly what it looked like. I could have screamed, could have thrown the bottle of red across the room and watched it explode like blood against the wall. But my body betrayed me. I only stared. And then here is the part that still keeps me awake. I saw the faint red blink of the camera above the pantry door, recording. Claire saw it too, and instead of panic, her smile widened. A secret sealed, a fuse lit. Because she didn't need me to expose them. She already had the perfect weapon, a video that could be twisted, framed, dressed up in lies, and used to gut everything Thomas and I had built. That night, I stayed silent, cooked the chicken, poured the wine, watched her sit across from my son, her husband, with that same mouth, that same lipstick, and wondered if I had just witnessed the exact moment my family's future ended. I thought I could manage it. I thought secrets could be buried if you pressed down hard enough, but secrets don't rot in the ground. They grow teeth, and they come back when you least expect them hungry. And when Claire finally bared hers, it wasn't just my marriage she wanted. It was every cent, every acre, every ounce of inheritance my children were supposed to receive, and she nearly got it. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't crash through the door like thunder. It seeps in quietly, like damp rot beneath floorboards, until one day you realize the house you live in is already collapsing. For weeks after the kiss, I told myself I had imagined it worse than it was, that maybe Thomas had been drunk, maybe Claire had leaned in too close. I fed myself excuses the way you feed a sick dog broth, slow, steady, to keep it alive just a little longer. But then the notes began, folded slips of paper tucked into my purse, slipped beneath my pillow, left inside the mailbox with no stamp. The handwriting was neat, almost girlish. Claire's. Does Daniel know where his wife was that night? How do you think the grandchildren will look at you when they see what the camera caught? We both know the truth. The question is who will say it first. Each note was a blade, pressed against my throat, reminding me that silence didn't belong to me, it belonged to her. At night, Thomas lay beside me, sleeping heavily, the smell of whiskey clinging to his skin. I would stare at the ceiling, every creak of the house sounding like footsteps, every shadow shifting like proof about to surface. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers. But what could he give me? Denial, apologies I couldn't trust. And what if Daniel found out first? Not from me, but from her. I lived in terror of the day my son would knock on my door, camera footage in his hand, eyes burning with betrayal. That fear kept me quiet. Claire, of course, grew bolder. She began arriving at our home without Daniel, dropping off groceries she insisted we needed, bringing bottles of wine she poured too generously for Thomas. She would brush against him in front of me, little touches that could be dismissed as accidents. But I knew better. They were messages, and everyone said the same thing, I own you. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her perched on the arm of his chair, laughing at some story he barely told. Thomas didn't shove her away. He didn't even look guilty. He looked comfortable. And when Claire finally noticed me standing there, she didn't flinch. She only tilted her head, smiled faintly, and said, "Oh, Margaret, you startled us." The word us hung in the air like smoke. That night, I confronted him. "Does she have something on you?" My voice trembled. Thomas didn't look up from his glass. "You're imagining things." "No," I said sharply. "I'm not." Finally, he looked at me, eyes glassy, jaw tight. "Margaret, do you want to destroy this family? Because that's where this kind of talk leads. Destroy the family." The word stuck like poison, as if I were the one striking matches, not the man who had kissed his son's wife. That was the night I realized the truth. I was trapped in a prison built by two people, one I had married, and one I had welcomed as a daughter, and both held the keys. But the fear didn't stop there. It grew teeth when Thomas updated his will. I found the draft crumpled in his study, half hidden under a ledger. My hand shook as I scanned the lines. Language I had never seen before. Clauses rewritten, trusts restructured, and in the margins, Claire's name again and again, as though she had been dictating. I felt the blood drain from my face. If he signed it, if he formalized this, Claire wouldn't just hold a secret. She would hold the future of everything we had worked for, my children's inheritance, my grandchildren's security, 25 years of clawing our way to stability. All of it could be funneled into her hands. I confronted him again, this time with the paper in my fist. "Why is she in this?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "She's family. She's Daniel's wife," I snapped. "Not yours." His silence was worse than denial, because silence meant agreement. That night, I locked the study and hid the key, but I knew it was useless. Fear is stronger than locks, and Claire had made herself inevitable. The next morning, she called me. Her voice was syrup-sweet, polite. "Margaret," she said, "you must be tired. You've carried this house, this family, for so long. Maybe it's time you let someone younger handle the future. Don't you think I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles cracked? Stay away from me." She laughed softly, like I'd told a joke. "Oh, I will, until the day comes when I don't." And as if to prove her point, the very next week I noticed changes. Thomas gave her access to documents I hadn't even seen. She started attending financial meetings with him, sitting where I once sat, speaking in tones that suggested ownership rather than inclusion. She wasn't just circling us, she was inside already, weaving herself into the very structure of our lives. That was when fear became something else, because I realized she didn't have to reveal the affair at all. She only had to wait until the day she wanted to cash it in. This wasn't about lust. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about power, and Claire had all of it. My fear wasn't that she'd tell Daniel. My fear was that she wouldn't need to, because by the time the truth came out, she would already own everything, and I had no idea how to stop her. Rage doesn't come as fire, not at first. It starts as a pulse in your ears, a heat under your skin, a vibration you can't calm no matter how still you sit. And when I looked at Claire smiling at my husband like she already wore my ring, already bore his name, I felt it bloom inside me, black and sharp. I had spent months paralyzed by fear, swallowing my words, praying the secret would die if I starved it of oxygen. But fear is exhausting, and exhaustion curdles into fury. It started small. petty. Maybe. I shredded the notes she left instead of hiding them, fed the strips into the garbage disposal until the blade screamed. I began watching her with a stillness that made her nervous, answering her fake sweet questions with silence. Rage taught me that silence can be louder than shouting, but it wasn't enough. The night I found Claire at Thomas's desk, rifling through drawers she had no right to touch, something in me snapped. She startled when she saw me, then quickly covered it with a smirk, looking for something I asked. Her smile didn't falter, just helping Thomas stay organized. He trusts me. The way she said he trusts me was a challenge, a knife she knew would cut. I stepped closer, close enough to see her pupils flare. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I whispered, "because trust is a rope and ropes fray." Her smile wavered, just slightly, before snapping back into place. But I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the hairline crack in her mask, and it fed me like oxygen. That night, when Thomas was snoring drunk beside me, I slipped into his study. I photocopied every page of his new draft will, every clause, every signature line. Then I placed the copies in a folder marked with a single word, insurance. It was my first act of defiance, and once you taste defiance, it's impossible to stop. I started gathering more. Receipts of purchases Claire had made with Thomas's card, bank transfers labeled with vague descriptions, phone records, showing calls between them at hours. No daughter-in-law should be calling her father-in-law. Every piece of paper I collected was another match in the box I kept hidden in the hollow panel of my armoire. Sometimes I imagined the day I would strike one, but rage isn't only quiet. Sometimes it bursts, wild and reckless. One Sunday dinner, Daniel joked about how much time his wife was spending with his father. Dad's practically her financial mentor. He laughed, cutting his roast. "She'll know more about the family money than I ever will." Claire chuckled, but when her eyes flicked to mine, they glinted with warning. Say nothing. And for months, I had obeyed that silent command. But not that night. You should be careful with jokes like that. I said evenly, my fork clinking against the plate. People might start thinking there's more truth in them than you realize. The table went silent. Claire's hand froze mid-air. Thomas cleared his throat, too loud, too forced. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "Mom?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, my smile sharp as glass. Just a thought. The rage felt good. It felt alive, but it was dangerous. Too, I knew I was walking a knife's edge. One wrong word, and the secret could explode in my face. Still, it was worth it to see Claire's knuckles whiten around her wine glass. Later that week, I took it further. I started moving things around subtle sabotage. I replaced Thomas's cufflinks with the cheaper pair I had hidden away, just to watch him snap at Claire for misplacing the good ones. I hid the folder she'd been organizing for him and slid it into a drawer in the laundry room, so when she came looking, she'd appear incompetent. None of it could expose the affair, but each act was a splinter under her skin. One evening, I intercepted a package delivered to the house. The return address was a boutique far too expensive for Claire to be shopping at on her own salary. Inside was a silk scarf, the color of wine, with a handwritten note for our next trip. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I tucked it away with the rest of my insurance. That night, as I slid the box back into its hiding place, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face was different, harder, eyes sharper, mouth set. I realized I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like someone sharpening a blade. But anger is a risky weapon. Wield it wrong, and it cuts the hand that holds it. I would learn that soon enough. For now, though, rage gave me power. It filled the hollow space fear had carved out of me, and power was something Claire had never expected me to take back. Rage gave me energy, but it wasn't enough to win. Claire was clever, too clever to be shaken by missing folders or a sarcastic jab at the dinner table. If she felt the splinters I planted, she never showed it. Instead, she smiled more sweetly, stayed longer after meals, pressed her hand on Thomas's arm, as if she were staking a claim. That was when I realized this wasn't going to be a fight of fists or screaming accusations. It would be a chess match, and she had already positioned her pieces. The first move came on a Wednesday morning. A man in a charcoal suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Michael Lawson, family counsel. His smile was sharp, professional. the kind lawyers wear when they already know you're at a disadvantage. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, flipping open a leather folder, "I'm here to discuss a trust revision. Your husband and daughter-in-law have been working closely on new structures for the estate. I just need your acknowledgement before we proceed." My blood went cold. Daughter-in-law? He said it like it was natural, like it was a given that she had the right to be in those conversations. I scanned the document he slid across my table. It was dense, legal jargon layered like bricks in a wall, but the meaning was clear. Claire's name appeared beside Thomas's in sections where my children's should have been. "She's not my heir," I snapped, pushing the papers back. The lawyer only smiled politely. "Of course, ma'am, but Mr. Harlow values her input. It's all quite standard." Standard. The word dripped like oil. After he left, I stormed into the study. Thomas sat behind the desk, sipping coffee, unbothered. "You let her into our finances," I demanded. He didn't look up. "She's family, Maisa, Margaret. She understands these things better than you, better than me." The word stung more than the betrayal itself. I had built that portfolio alongside him, balanced budgets when he gambled too much in his younger years, sold jewelry to pay off debts, and now he was telling me my son's wife, his mistress, knew better. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glow of the security camera in the corner, the one that had captured everything. Rage whispered that I should pull the footage, show Daniel, burn it all down. But another voice, quieter, more dangerous, whispered something else. "Wait. Use it." The next morning, I made my move. I booked a consultation with an attorney of my own, an old colleague of Thomas's who owed me favors. I laid out the story carefully. Not the affair, not yet, but the financial manipulation, the trust revisions, the sudden involvement of Claire. He listened, eyes narrowing. "You need leverage," he said finally. "I already have it," I whispered. He didn't press. Maybe he didn't want to know. Over the next weeks, I tested Claire. Little games. I left my purse unattended with a flash drive peeking out, labeled estate draft. Hours later, it had been moved, ever so slightly. I planted false notes in Thomas's appointment book, watched as Claire arrived early for a meeting that didn't exist. Every time she took the bait, my folder of evidence grew, but she was playing her own game. Claire began planting seeds in Daniel's mind. One evening, he called, his voice tight with concern. "Mom, Claire told me you've been confused lately, forgetting things. She's worried about you." My grip on the phone tightened. "Confused? She said you accused her of stealing papers. That you're hiding things from Dad. Mom, are you okay?" The fury nearly choked me. Claire wasn't just circling the inheritance, she was laying the groundwork to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, paranoid, unfit to manage anything. And then came the twist. A week later, I found a letter tucked beneath my pillow. Not her usual taunting note. This one was official, notarized, bearing Thomas's signature. It was a petition for guardianship. If filed, it would declare me mentally incompetent, transferring control of all financial decisions to my husband, and by extension, Claire. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling in my hands, the walls of the room closing in. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about erasure. I thought of how carefully she'd orchestrated it, the whispers to Daniel about my memory, the lawyer's visit with documents already bearing her name, Thomas's sudden insistence that she understood better. She wasn't improvising. She was executing a plan. The air felt thin, my breath shallow. For the first time, I wasn't just furious. I was terrified that I might actually lose myself on paper. Even while still alive and fully aware, Claire wasn't waiting to inherit. She was planning to take it all while I was still breathing. Unless I played my next move perfectly, she would succeed. Grief doesn't always follow death. Sometimes it arrives while you're still alive, standing in the middle of your own kitchen, staring at a piece of paper that tells you you've already been erased. The guardianship petition shook in my hands like it carried a current. All my life I had been careful, meticulous balancing accounts, saving receipts, clipping coupons when Thomas wasted money on bad investments. And now here I was, one signature away from being declared incompetent. I didn't cry at first. I folded the paper, placed it on the counter, and made tea with movements as automatic as breathing. But when the kettle screamed, something inside me cracked. I sank onto the floor, the steam fogging my glasses, tears slipping down my cheeks. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. But I could hear them anyway. Claire's laugh, Thomas's steady voice, Daniel's concerned questions. Their chorus filled the rooms, louder than the blood pounding in my ears. She's confused. She's unstable. She's not capable. I pressed my palms to my face and let the grief roll through me. The days that followed blurred together. I wandered through rooms like a ghost, staring at family photographs that no longer looked like mine. Daniel as a boy with chocolate smeared across his face, our daughter, Emily, grinning with missing teeth. Vacations where Thomas held my hand like it mattered. All of it now felt like evidence in a case I was already losing. Even my friends noticed. At church, Marlene touched my arm gently. "You look tired, Margaret." "Everything all right at home." I opened my mouth, but the words curdled. What could I say? My husband is rewriting his will for his mistress, who happens to be my daughter-in-law, and together they're trying to prove I'm insane. The truth was too wild, too humiliating, so I only smiled and said, "Just busy." The cruelest part was watching Claire's performance in public. She leaned in close to me at Sunday service, adjusting my shawl with gentle fingers, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. "Don't worry, I'll remind you about choir practice this week." To anyone else, it looked like kindness. To me, it was theater, a carefully staged reminder that she was planting seeds of doubt about my memory, my mind. That night, I lay awake listening to Thomas's breathing beside me. Once, that sound had comforted me. Now it felt like chains rattling. My marriage bed was a battlefield where I had already lost. The collapse came fully one evening, when Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. He hugged me quickly, distracted, then sat me down like I was a child. "Mom," he said softly, "Claire's really worried about you. She says you're hiding papers, accusing people of things that don't make sense. You're not yourself." I stared at him. My own son, the boy I had carried through nights of fever, who once clung to my neck after nightmares. He was looking at me like I was fragile glass, a burden to be managed. "You believe her," I whispered. His silence was answer enough. Something in me broke, then not with anger, but with sorrow so deep it hollowed me out. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, locked the door. For 20 minutes I stared at my reflection. My face was pale, hair thinning, lines etched deeper than I remembered. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing myself. The thought was a dagger. What if I am the problem that night? I opened the hidden compartment in my armoire, where I kept the folder of evidence, the photocopied will, the receipts, the scarf, the fake meeting notes. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped it. But when I spread the papers across the bed, they didn't look like protection. They looked like chaos, scraps of paranoia, a madwoman's collection. Claire had already won. She didn't need to prove I was unfit. She only needed to let me prove it to myself. I gathered the papers back into the folder, shoved it into the compartment, and shut it hard enough to rattle the mirror. Then I slid down against the bed frame and wept until my throat ached. Days slipped past in silence. Meals went untouched. My garden, once a refuge, wilted under neglect. I didn't have the strength to water the herbs I had tended for years. Even the rosemary bush, stubborn as it was, turned brittle at the edges. I remember standing at the kitchen window, staring at its gray-green leaves, and thinking, that's me, drying out, disappearing. I wanted to fight. God, I wanted to, but at that moment, I felt utterly beaten. The walls of the house pressed in tighter with every passing day. My husband didn't see me. My son didn't believe me. My daughter-in-law was quietly building a case to bury me alive. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I considered surrender. Maybe it would be easier to let them have it. The house, the money, the estate. Let them carve me out of the picture and live with their prize. But collapse has a strange way of clearing the ground. When everything falls apart, you finally see what the foundation is made of. And mine, I would discover, was stronger than they knew. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, robe hanging loose, tea gone cold, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friend or a neighbor, it was a courier. He handed me a thick envelope stamped confidential. Inside, notice of a court hearing. The guardianship petition was no longer a threat. It was filed. In 3 weeks, a judge would decide if I was mentally incompetent. My hand shook so hard the papers slipped to the floor. Claire had finally made her move. For hours I sat frozen, imagining the humiliation standing in front of a judge, while Claire painted me as senile, unstable, paranoid, my children watching, maybe even nodding along. It was over, but collapse, as I learned, clears the ground, and in that rubble I found something sharp. I opened the hidden compartment in my armoire and pulled out the folder, my so-called madwoman's collection. I spread it across the bed, not as scraps this time, but as a mosaic. Receipts, bank transfers, phone logs, the scarf with the boutique note, the photocopied will, piece by piece. The chaos took shape. This wasn't paranoia. This was evidence. The first twist came when I plugged in the old security drive, the one that had been gathering dust in the back of my closet. My hands trembled as I cued the footage from that night, the kiss, the laugh, Claire's smirk as she glanced at the camera. I had never shown it to anyone. I had been too ashamed, but shame had no place anymore. I burned the footage onto 3 separate USB drives, one for my lawyer, one for the court, and one hidden just in case. Then came the second twist, the one even I hadn't seen coming. While reviewing the drive, I stumbled across more than just the kiss. There were nights I hadn't realized the cameras had captured Claire, slipping into Thomas's study, pulling out files, Thomas handing her envelopes thick with cash, hushed arguments that ended with her storming out, clutching papers in her fist. And then, the final nail audio from the kitchen 3 weeks ago, Claire's voice, low but clear, speaking into her phone. Don't worry. By the time the hearing's done, she won't have a penny. Once we have control, Daniel will believe whatever I tell him. My knees nearly gave out. She wasn't just manipulating Thomas. She was setting up my own son to inherit nothing. She wanted to funnel it all to herself, leaving both of my children with scraps. For the first time in months, I laughed. A wild, broken sound, but laughter all the same. She had been so arrogant, so sure of herself. She forgot the cameras never stopped recording. When I showed the footage to my attorney, his expression shifted from weary caution to sharp delight. This, he said, tapping the screen, changes everything. They wanted to put you on trial for incompetence. Fine. Let's put them on trial for exploitation, fraud, and coercion. Judges love patterns, and Claire has left you a perfect one. The day of the hearing arrived. Claire entered the courtroom dressed in somber gray, face soft with rehearsed worry. Thomas sat beside her, eyes heavy, like he already regretted the path he'd chosen but didn't know how to turn back. Daniel sat behind them, torn, confused. I walked in last, folder in hand, shoulders straight. I looked older. Yes, worn down, but I wasn't broken. Claire began with her story, voice quivering on cue. Margaret has been forgetful, paranoid. She accused me of theft, of betrayal. We only want what's best for her. The judge turned to me. Do you have anything to say, Miss Harlow? I handed the clerk the USB drive. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'd like to submit evidence. The screen lit up. First, the kiss. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's face drained of color. Then the clip of Claire pocketing cash. The phone call about the guardianship. Her own words damning her. By the time it ended, the silence was suffocating. Claire's mask cracked. That's taken out of context, no. I cut in. That's context finally restored. Thomas buried his face in his hands. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his voice shaking. Is it true, Claire? Is this all true? Her silence was answer enough. The judge cleared his throat, petition denied, and given the evidence, I recommend counsel consider further investigation into potential fraud. It was over, not just denied turned back on them. As we left the courtroom, Claire reached for Daniel's arm. He shook her off like she burned him. She turned to Thomas, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. For the first time, she stood alone. That was my double twist. Not only did I survive their attack, but I had stripped her bare in front of everyone. Her power was gone, and mine was just beginning to return. After the hearing, I went home to an empty house. The silence was different now, not suffocating, not accusing, just quiet, the kind you can finally breathe in. Thomas stayed at a hotel that night. He didn't call. He didn't try to explain. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to explain. Claire vanished from the family orbit, leaving only the faint scent of perfume on paper she'd once touched. Her power evaporated like smoke in sunlight. For weeks afterward, Daniel didn't speak to me. He wrestled with his shame, his guilt for believing her, for doubting me. I let him have the silence sometimes. Love means letting someone sit with their own mistakes until they're ready to face them. When he finally came by, he stood in the doorway, hands shaking. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I only nodded. Forgiveness is not a single act. It's a process. But his eyes were clear, and for the first time in months, I saw my son again. That was enough. I also saw myself again. I started tending the garden, the rosemary and thyme that had withered in my neglect. I trimmed the roses, pulled weeds with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The plants revived slowly, stubbornly, just like me. One evening, I took the evidence folder from the armoire and carried it outside. I fed each paper to a metal tin and lit a match. The flames licked high, devouring every receipt, every photograph, every trace of the war I had fought. Smoke curled upward, carrying my rage and grief away with it. When the ashes cooled, I felt lighter. The money was safe, the inheritance secured. But more importantly, I had remembered who I was, not a woman erased. Not a burden, not a shadow. I was the keeper of the truth, and I had survived. If there is a lesson in all this, it is simple silence can be dangerous, but it can also be sharpened into a weapon. I stayed quiet too long, but when I finally spoke, I did so with proof no one could deny. And I want you to hear this, especially if you've ever felt small, invisible, dismissed. You are not powerless. Even in the darkest moment, there is always a move left to make. I thought I had lost everything. In reality, I had been stripped down to the one thing that mattered most, my will to fight, and that was enough to save me. So I keep going. I wake early, brew strong tea, open the windows wide. I hum to myself while trimming the garden. The air feels lighter. The house feels like mine again, because it is. And no one husband, daughter-in-law, or anyone else will ever take that from me again. What would you have done if you were her? Leave a comment. Your story could be the one that helps someone else wake up. Subscribe, Grandma's Journal, for more true story thrillers like this, where the quiet ones fight back, and secrets never stay buried.